fascinated with this case ever since I was a kid. How someone managed to pull off something so daring and without a hitch, and more so, how they managed to get away with it has always intrigued me. The story is essentially the hunt for buried treasure, a man who dared and won. Now, 47 years later, the FBI and general public are still none the wiser as to the identity of this man, if he even survived, and his whereabouts today if he did. Regardless, this is still an incredible story from a period in relatively recent crime history, where an element of fascination still captivates. This is the story of D.B Cooper and the hijacking of Flight 305. On November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a man in his mid-40s who was carrying a black attaché case checked into the flight desk of Northwest Orient Airlines at Portland International Airport. The man gave his name as Dan Cooper and paid $20 in cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle. The northerly flight would take around 28 minutes on board Flight 305, a Boeing 727, and boarding was quick. In 1971, even though there had been a recent spate of plane hijackings, there was no airport security in place prior to boarding a flight. Cooper boarded the plane via the rear flight stairs and took his seat number 18C in the passenger cabin. He lit a cigarette and ordered a bourbon and 7-Up. This was quite a sophisticated drink back in 1971. Eyewitnesses described Cooper as a male, mid-40s, and around 5'11" in height. He was wearing a black, lightweight raincoat, loafers, a dark suit, a neatly pressed white collared shirt with black tie and mother-of-pearl tie pin. However, fellow passenger Robert Gregory, who was seated diagonally from Cooper and got a good look at him for a prolonged period of time, described Cooper as 5'11", with wavy and greasy dark hair, with a dark red or rusty brown suit with wide lapels and a black clip-on J.C. Penney tie. He looked cheap, scruffy with an outfit that was thrown together, trying to look sophisticated, but failing miserably. Flight 305 originated in Washington, D.C. It stopped at Minneapolis, Great Falls, Missoula, Spokane, and Portland before finally arriving at Seattle. It was approximately one-third full when it left Portland at 2:50 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to the nearest flight attendant, Florence Schaffner. Schaffner placed the note into her purse without reading it. It wasn't uncommon for flight attendants to receive notes from single businessmen, but she wasn't interested in taking his number, assuming that's what it contained. Cooper leaned forward to her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner took a look. The note was printed in neat capital letters in black ink. It stated that Cooper had a bomb in his briefcase. After Schaffner read the note, Cooper told her to sit beside him. She did as requested, then quietly asked if she could see the bomb. Cooper opened his briefcase long enough for her to glimpse 8 red cylinders, attached to wires coated with red insulation, and a large cylindrical battery. Cooper closed the briefcase and stated his demands. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency, 4 parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve, a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the aircraft upon arrival, and meals for the flight crew. Schaffner conveyed Cooper's instructions to the pilots in the cockpit immediately. Cooper placed on a pair of dark sunglasses and waited patiently. Captain William Scott, the lead pilot, contacted Seattle-Tacoma Airport Air Traffic Control. He relayed the list of demands and informed them that Flight 305 had been hijacked. The president of Northwest Orient, Donald Nyrop, without hesitation, authorized the payment of the ransom and for the other demands to be met in full. He asked that all staff at the airport and on board the plane to cooperate fully with the hijackers' demands. The aircraft circled Puget Sound for approximately 2 hours. This gave the FBI time to assemble all the required demands and mobilize the emergency services. Passengers on board the plane were informed by the captain that there was a minor technical issue and this would delay their arrival for a short period of time. Schaffner noted that Cooper appeared familiar with the local terrain. He remarked to her, "It looks like Tacoma down there," as the aircraft flew over it. He also mentioned in conversation that McCord Air Force Base was only a 20-minute drive from Seattle-Tacoma Airport, which was also correct. Schaffner stated he was very calm, polite, and well-spoken. He was very friendly and not rude at all. Tina Mucklow, another flight attendant, agreed with this. He wasn't nervous, she told investigators. He seemed rather nice. He was never cruel or nasty. He was thoughtful and calm at all times. He ordered another drink, a second bourbon, this time with water, and paid his drinks tab, even going as far as giving Schaffner the change as a tip. The FBI assembled the ransom money, 10,000 unmarked $20 bills with serial numbers beginning with the letter L. This indicated issuance by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. They also had serial numbers from the 1963A or 1969 series. The FBI took a microfilm photograph of each of the notes. Cooper rejected military-issue parachutes that were offered by McCord Air Force Base. He insisted instead on civilian parachutes with manually operated ripcords. These were obtained from a local Seattle skydiving school. The aircraft landed at 5:39 p.m. at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. As the sun had by now set, Cooper instructed the pilot to taxi the plane to an isolated but brightly lit area of the runway and for all window shades to be closed. This would deter police snipers. Northwest Orient's operations manager, Al Lee, walked toward the aircraft. He did so in street clothes to avoid the possibility that Cooper might mistake his airline uniform for that of a police officer. He delivered a knapsack with the cash and the parachutes to flight attendant Tina Mucklow via the rear stairs. After delivery, Cooper ordered all passengers, Schaffner, and senior flight attendant Alice Hancock off the plane. The refueling now began. Cooper spoke with the pilot and informed him and the flight crew of his flight plan. They were to take a southeast course toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft, approximately 100 knots or 115 miles per hour ground speed, and at a maximum of 10,000 feet altitude. He also specified that the landing gear remain in a downward position and the wing flaps be lowered to 15 degrees. Finally, the cabin was to remain unpressurized for the journey. The co-pilot, William Ratachak, raised a small issue with these requirements and stated that the aircraft's range was limited to around 1,000 miles under the required configuration. Cooper discussed the need for a second refueling stop with the flight crew, and they all agreed on Reno, Nevada. Now that refueling was complete and with the plane's rear exit door lowered, Cooper directed the pilot to take off. Northwest Orient objected to the pilots over the radio, stating to take off with the rear stairs lowered was very, very unsafe. Cooper dismissed this and stated that it was indeed very safe to do so, and the 727 had been tested and confirmed able to do this when designed. Cooper, not wishing to appear argumentative though, agreed to have the pilots raise the stairs on takeoff, then lower them once in the air. Prior to takeoff, an FAA official requested that he be allowed to come aboard the plane to speak face-to-face with Cooper, but this was declined. Once refueling was complete, the plane took off at approximately 7:40 p.m. There were now only 5 people on board: Cooper, pilot Scott, co-pilot Ratachak, H.E. Anderson, the flight engineer, and flight attendant Tina Mucklow. Unknown to Cooper, 2 F-106 fighter aircraft were scrambled from McCord Air Force Base. These both followed the plane, one above and one below, out of Cooper's view. An Air National Guard mission, which was taking place in the area, also diverted a Lockheed T-33 trainer plane to shadow the jet at a safe distance. A further 2 military aircraft were also scrambled to follow the jet at a much higher altitude, and again, at a distance. There were 5 planes in total now trailing the hijacked plane. After takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to join the rest of the crew in the cockpit and stay there, with the door closed, no matter what, until they land in Reno. Mucklow complied, and as she did so, observed Cooper tying something around his waist. At around 8 p.m., a cockpit warning light and alarm sounded. It indicated that the rear stair had been deployed. The pilot, via the intercom, offered assistance to Cooper, who abruptly refused and told them to stay in the cockpit until they land in Reno. At around 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section sustained a sudden upward movement, felt within the cockpit controls. The plane required leveling off. At 10:15 p.m., the plane landed at Reno Airport. The plane's rear staircase was still down. The FBI, state troopers, and Reno Police Department surrounded the jet. An armed search of the plane took place, and FBI agents confirmed that Cooper was no longer aboard the plane. The investigation. 66 unidentified latent fingerprints were obtained by the FBI from aboard the airliner. The FBI also found Cooper's black clip-on tie clip, and 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which had been opened. Eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno, and all those who personally interacted with Cooper were all extensively interviewed. A series of detailed composite sketches were developed and placed on wanted posters nationwide. Police and FBI began questioning possible suspects right away, and over 800 people were individually looked at as persons of interest. All were eventually eliminated from the investigation with the exception of around 24 individuals. One of the first people looked at in this case was an Oregon man by the name of D.B Cooper. He was quickly ruled out as a suspect, but a local Oregon reporter by the name of James Long had reported this story and incorrectly assumed that the hijacker gave his name as D.B Cooper. This story was then repeated by Associate Press Wire Service reporters Joe Frazier and Clyde Jabin, thus making D.B Cooper the name forever associated with this crime. At the moment that the flight crew reported that they felt the sudden upward movement from the rear of the plane, the aircraft was flying through a heavy rainstorm over the Lewis River in southwestern Washington. This was stated to be the point that Cooper had jumped from the plane's rear stairs and deployed his parachute. Cooper's landing zone was estimated to be an area on the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington, near Lake Merwin. FBI agents and sheriff deputies searched large areas of the mountainous wilderness on foot and by helicopter. Door-to-door searches of local residences were also conducted. Other search parties ran patrol boats along Lake Merwin and Lake Yale. There was no trace of Cooper, or any parachutes, his clothing, or his briefcase or knapsack of money. The FBI also conducted several searches for the entirety of the flight path between Seattle and Reno, and again, no sign of Cooper or anything he had with him was found. In early 1972, teams of FBI agents, aided by some 200 Army soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, and civilian volunteers, conducted another thorough ground search of Clark and Cowlitz counties for a total of 32 days. Electronic Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, used a submarine to search the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin. The search operation, the most extensive and intensive in U.S. history, uncovered no evidence relating to the hijacking, no sign of Cooper, be it alive or dead, and no sign of any parachutes deployed or otherwise. The FBI distributed lists of the money serial numbers to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks, and other businesses that used cash in large sums, and to allow law enforcement agencies around the world to have access to the information. Northwest Orient offered a reward of 15% of the recovered money. In early 1973, several newspapers offered $1,000 rewards to anyone who could hand in one of the monetary notes used in the ransom to their respective newspapers or FBI offices. The rewards remained in place for over a year, with the press regularly printing the serial numbers from the bills. The money, however, never showed up, and no one successfully claimed any of the rewards. After 45 years of investigation, multiple leads and hundreds of possible suspects, the FBI announced that it was suspending its investigation into the hijacking in July 2016. The FBI confirmed that they will look into credible new evidence, but all activity for this investigation has now ceased. In 1978, a placard printed with instructions for lowering the aft stairs of a 727 was found by a deer hunter near a logging road about 13 miles east of Castle Rock in Washington. This was well north of Lake Merwin, but within Flight 305's basic flight path. This was outside of the FBI search zone, however, when they looked for Cooper in 1971. In February 1980, Brian Ingram, an 8-year-old on vacation with his family at the Columbia River, was playing at a beach known as Tina Bar, which was around 20 miles southwest of Ariel. While playing in the sand, the child found 3 packets of ransom cash in a weathered and disintegrated state, but the bills and serial numbers were still legible and still bundled in rubber bands in the same order it was given to Cooper. To date, none of the remaining notes, however, have turned up anywhere in the world. There is speculation that the Mount St. Helens volcanic eruption of 1980 might have destroyed or covered over any further possible evidence from the hijacking, provided of course that any such evidence landed in the area that was initially thought of as the landing zone. The FBI announced in 2007 that a partial DNA profile had been obtained from Cooper's clip-on tie. However, they accepted that there is no guarantee that the DNA was placed on the tie by Cooper or was Cooper's DNA. The FBI also disclosed that when Cooper was given the 4 parachutes, he chose the older of the 2 primary parachutes that were supplied to him, rather than the technically superior newer sports parachutes. Was this because his parachute training wasn't recent? And maybe his knowledge base was around older equipment? From the 2 reserve parachutes, he also chose to take a dummy chute with an operative ripcord intended for classroom demonstrations. Although it had clear markings identifying it to any experienced skydiver as non-functional, it seems strange why he would have taken one of these. In 2009, a group of civilians hoping to resolve the case and calling themselves citizen sleuths were given permission by the FBI to test Cooper's clip-on tie for microscopic particles. Using an electron microscopy, lycopodium spores, likely from a pharmaceutical product, were identified, as well as fragments of bismuth and aluminum. Particles of pure unalloyed titanium have also been found on the tie. The group of scientific experts stated that titanium was much rarer in the 1970s than it is today, and was at that time only found in metal production facilities or at chemical companies who used it to store extremely corrosive substances. The findings suggested that Cooper might have been a chemist, or possibly an engineer in a metal or chemical manufacturing plant. Rare earth minerals such as cerium and strontium sulfide had also been identified amongst particles from the tie. One of the rare applications for such elements in the 1970s was Boeing's Supersonic Transport Development Project, suggesting the possibility that Cooper was a Boeing employee. This, coupled with his knowledge of Boeing aircraft and their performance that was shown in conversation in the plane's cockpit, is strong circumstantial evidence. No searches or checks against Boeing staff from 1971 has been made to date, however. Talking of circumstantial evidence, the name Dan Cooper is actually a clue within itself. Dan Cooper was actually a comic book character. The character appeared in a comic book that was published in France but that had a big readership in Canada. The central character was a member of the Canadian Air Force, and one specific storyline from 1970 in particular had him delivering a ransom on board a Boeing 727, then parachuting off via the rear stairs. This all seems like a hell of a coincidence. Was Dan Cooper Canadian, maybe? While there has been many suspects over the years, and many who have claimed to be Cooper himself, the evidence has just never been there to give any story any serious possibility. The fact that the money has never been spent might indicate that Cooper didn't survive the drop, but maybe Cooper never intended to spend the money. Maybe the whole thing was a thrill seek, or maybe he knew he would be traced right away, so disposed of the money. There is some speculation that Cooper might not have jumped from the plane when the flight staff thought that he did, and merely jumped on the rear stairs to make people think that he jumped, and actually possibly parachuted at a later point during the flight, such as on the approach to Reno. It's certainly worth noting that of the 5 planes that were following the hijacked jet, none of them saw anyone jump from the plane, nor had their radar pick up anyone as jumping from the plane. By jumping as the plane approached the runway in Reno, it would have been both below radar and also out of the view from any tailing aircraft. Incidentally, a letter sent to the FBI in Reno and postmarked as from Sacramento 3 days after the hijacking occurred simply read, "Thanks for your hospitality, Reno. Kind regards, D. Cooper." Do you have a theory as to who Cooper was? Do you think he survived the jump from the plane? I would love to know your thoughts and theories, so please drop me a message on Instagram, Twitter, or via our website. And don't forget, Sleep tight, everyone, and take care of yourselves. And stand firm as you enter the darkest night.